Today we have a crazy revenge story about a father thinking his son is a failure. We'll get into it in a bit, but first, I made my ex pay for our wedding and I didn't show up. Do you know what they say about nice guys finishing last? Well, that's precisely the story of my life. In the course of my life, I've had two jarring relationship experiences, and they both broke me. The first experience was with my first love, the girl I was with in high school. She made me a complete emotional wreck. She cheated on 2 occasions. We were a power couple, so the whole school knew, and it was very embarrassing for me. You know what really sucked? She was never even sorry for her actions. She never apologized properly on both occasions. She just sneaked into my room in the middle of the night and we made up after she made a puppy face and kissed me. My mom was mad that I took her back, and my kid brother was mad too. I think he stopped respecting me after I took her back the second time, but I didn't care. I convinced myself that they didn't like her and that I was going to fight for the woman I loved. Want to know how that relationship ended? She broke up with me. She said something about needing us to go our separate ways because of college, but I found out that she met someone who was in his sophomore year in college. I was deeply hurt. All through college, I never dated anyone. I was the textbook definition of a rake. I just went around having fun, but I always made it clear to girls that I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted to have fun. If they were cool, we would go on with the fun, and if they weren't, they left. I met a few who tried to convince themselves that they could change me, and I'll be honest, I enjoyed watching them try, but my mind was made up. I could not even conceive the idea of being in a relationship. I refrained from getting into a serious relationship until I met my ex-girlfriend, whom this story is about. I met her at a conference organized for accountants and financial auditors. The company I worked for sent me and her company sent her too. I thought she was the most gorgeous woman ever, but even then, I did not think of being in a relationship with her. I just fantasied about getting to know her and maybe going out and having fun. Yeah, I thought about sex too. Duh. I'm a fully functioning man. And she was wearing the hottest shade of red lipstick, a tight-fitted skirt, and a transparent blouse. I'm sure every straight guy in that hall thought about having sex with her. But for me, it wasn't just the sex. Sex wasn't even a big part of it. I just wanted to experience her. I wanted to hear her talk and how she thinks. Sadly for me, she didn't say anything during the conference, even though it was an interactive one. I did get to figure out where she worked from her colleague at work speaking to us though. I could have walked up to her and asked for her number, but I decided against it. Many guys were already approaching her, trying to get her attention. I knew it was a bad idea to join in that crowd. I wanted to stand out. 2 weeks later, I made some calls to old friends who was able to find out what her name was. Then I sent flowers to her office for a week. On the last day, I sent the flowers alongside a note that carried my name and phone number. I told her to call me if she wanted to, but not after praying that she would want to. I was quite confident in myself and I figured she'd be curious to know who had been sending her flowers, but I also worried that she'd roll her eyes and throw the card away. Luckily, she called me. I asked her to go out with me, but she refused. She insisted on meeting me before agreeing to go on a date. I showed up at her office at the close of work one day and she seemed happy to see me. She then agreed to go out with me, and that was the beginning of what would have been an amazing love story had she not messed it up. I was obsessed with this woman. I loved her to pieces. The only person I'd ever loved like that was my ex from high school, but even more this time. I allowed myself to be vulnerable with her. I committed myself to her and almost even lived for her at the time. I just wanted to be with her all the time, to make her happy. She was my world. After a year of being together, I asked her to move in with me, and she agreed. I was elated. She was always in my apartment, but the times that she had to leave made me so sad that I wanted her to completely move in with me. She loved me too, at least she did at first. She was just as crazy about me. We were in a small cocoon of our own, but there were times when I felt as though she didn't want the same thing as me or she didn't want me. I wonder if she just thought she could do better, or if there was someone else that she could just not move on from. There were times when I sensed the distance, but there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't even explain or put in words what I felt. I just ignored the feeling altogether. One thing about my ex was that she loved to show off. She had 3 best friends who she swore she loved very much, but I always noticed how she loved to show off to these friends. She was always trying to show that she had more stuff than them, or that her life was better than theirs. I knew this from how she bragged about the gifts I gave her at their hearing, how she bragged about our relationship and my love for her. Her friends envied her, that's for sure, and in a way, it made me happy too, because it made her happy. My ex was also terrified of her friends thinking her life was less perfect than it was. I knew this from how she avoided telling them about the times we argued. We could be arguing one minute, and then the next minute, when her friends came around, she'd be all over me, kissing me and acting like everything was perfect. She also feared being criticized by them. All outfits to every party were carefully selected to make sure that her friends didn't make fun of her. Anyway, my ex moved in with me. We had a beautiful life, and I was already thinking of proposing when I found out that my ex was cheating on me. She wasn't just cheating on me, she cheated on me our entire relationship. She was sleeping with her boss, who was married at the time. She was such a great liar, she even lied about hating him. Many times, she would come home telling me about how her boss made her day hell for her. She would tell me how tired she was, run straight to the bathroom, and get into bed. As you may have guessed, she would refuse to have sex that day. I could hardly even ask for it because I thought it would be insensitive to bring up sex when one's girlfriend was tired from dealing with a demanding and problematic boss. What I didn't know was that my ex was only trying to pull a wool over my eyes, and boy, did it work. She showed me an email she received from a scammer who had tried to scam her by lying about an inheritance when something caught my eye. She received an email that caught my attention. I knew her boss's name, so when it came in, I knew it was him. What unsettled me was that he called her beautiful, as in, he started off the email with, "Hello, beautiful." I immediately pretended to have forgotten something important and went into the bedroom. When I returned, we just completed our conversation about the scammer and that was it. She did not know that I saw the email her boss sent her, but I did, and I started to talk to a guy in the technology department of my company. I asked him if he could hack into her computer for me, and he agreed reluctantly. The next day, after she drove me to work, the tech dude drove me back home to help hack her computer. After an hour of trying, he finally got us in, and I had full access to her email. You know what's so funny? The fact that I never dealt with these things before, there was always someone present to watch my mystery. This coworker watched me break into pieces when I saw the exchange between my ex and her boss. They had been sleeping with each other before I even got into the picture. I felt so stupid. All these while I was hating on her boss with her and she was sleeping with him? The coworker, who's now one of my best friends, helped me put her computer away. He made me pick a few of my things and I spent a week in his house. I told my ex that my cousin had died and that I needed to be with my aunt. She was supportive and would call to hear from me every day. Anyway, I deserve an Oscar because everything I did up to the day I eventually carried out my revenge was undiluted professional acting. I returned home to my ex, and a few weeks later, I proposed to her. I was going to wait until 3 months had passed, but she'd started to irritate me. I could no longer stand her and how she told random lies against her boss. I never believed that she was wherever she said she'd be, simply didn't trust her. She was so happy about my proposal. It was another edge she had over her girlfriends, the first of the group to be engaged. She walked around the room admiring her ring and talking about how her friends were going to be green with envy. She then asked if she could replace the ring I got her with a more expensive one. I told her that it was fine. She went out and got herself an even more expensive ring and flaunted it. Truly, her friends were green with envy, if only they knew what was going to happen. My ex started to prepare for our wedding while I took the back seat and allowed her to do whatever. She told all the members of her family, sent out invites, and paid a deposit for many things too. I lied about needing time to pull my money out of something, so she kept loaning me money until I was able to take my funds out and refund her. The biggest purchase she made was to make full payment for a wedding venue. The venue was a highly competitive one, and if she hadn't paid at the time, it would be impossible to use that venue for the wedding. She wanted the best wedding, to make her friends and possibly other family members jealous, so she paid up front using her savings and told me about it. I assured her that I would refund her, and we went on with our plans. 2 weeks before the wedding, I came home one day and moved all the things that belonged to me in that house. I ghosted her. She almost went nuts. She was heartbroken. I know my ex very well. Yes, she loved me and wanted to marry me, but it was her ego more than anything that informed her how hurt she was. She feared being embarrassed in front of her friends and family. The perfect life that she had painted for them all came crashing down. I know she must have been hurt about the money too anyway. Months later, after I had ghosted her and dealt with too many dramas on account of that, her lawyer sent a letter to my office notifying me that she'd be suing for damages. I replied to her lawyer, telling her why I ghosted my ex, all about the affair with her boss. After sending that reply, I never heard from them again. At that point, I was amused because my ex still hadn't figured out why I did what I did. If I hadn't told her, she would have thought I was just a bad person. But it was she who was going to trap me in a marriage where she regularly slept with her boss. So I would say that this is a satisfying retribution. You definitely took a risk by getting money involved. That's a slippery slope. Like when that lawyer sent you that letter, that could have gone sideways quick. But I guess she realized that she screwed up, no pun intended, and just decided to cut bait. Cheaters suck and liars are even worse. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these nuclear revenge videos, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to our podcast. That said, our next story is Know Where to Draw the Line. From as far back as I can remember, there was always this deep connection that I felt to words. While other kids were out playing, I'd be lost in a book, exploring worlds far beyond the small town where I lived. At the start, reading novels was a way to escape my reality, which was not so good at that early stage. The novels always came through for me, and I could soar to blissful realities from the pages of the novel. At least in my head I could. But the funny part is that it did not end in the novels. There was a way I was able to quickly grasp certain concepts from the books, personalizing them in things I did. The teachers would often comment on how my essays and stories had a maturity they didn't expect from someone my age. I guess that's what set me apart. Writing wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. So over the years, getting into high school, art and literature have always been my sanctuary. Whether I was painting, writing poems, or crafting stories, I found a certain kind of peace and creativity that I couldn't find anywhere else. Luckily, I was good at it. But it was my writing that truly defined me. My words had a way of bringing complex ideas to life, and that's what I loved most about it. Despite this, I never really felt the need to boast about my abilities. Winning awards and school competitions was great, but what mattered to me was the craft itself. I'd spend hours immersed in classic literature, trying to learn from the greats and practice until my fingers were sore from typing. My biggest dream was to win a prestigious scholarship, a ticket to one of the best universities in the country where I could fully immerse myself in the world of literary arts. But even that did not cross my mind until my literature teacher, who doubled as my English teacher, told me of the possibility. My school was known for its competitive atmosphere, especially when it came to the arts. It wasn't just about passing exams or getting good grades. Here, creativity was the heart and soul of the place, and they made sure to drill it into the students. We had students who didn't want anything to do with the arts because of their interest in sciences look forward to the compulsory classes. The hallways were lined with students' paintings, and the school library was packed with shelves of books that showcased the best work from past students. Every day felt like a race to prove who could be the most creative, the most original. Teachers pushed us to think beyond the obvious, to dig deeper into our talents. Given the type of school, some alumni decided it was a good idea to start a scholarship for arts since there were already some for those in the sciences. In this environment, the scholarship became the ultimate prize. It wasn't just about the money, though that was part of it. Winning the scholarship meant securing your future. It was a ticket to one of the top universities, a chance to study with the best minds in the country without paying a dime for the rest of your undergrad. For someone like me, who dreamed of a career in literary arts, it was everything. The scholarship also brought recognition, both from the school and the wider community. With so much at stake, everyone was willing to do whatever it took to win it. Then there was Owen. On the surface, we weren't all that different. Both of us had a passion for writing, and both of us had big dreams. Owen was talented, no doubt about it. His stories were sharp, his characters well crafted, and his way with words often earned him praise from our teachers. But no matter how good he was, I always seemed to be just a step ahead. This is not me being proud or letting my pride get the better judgment out of me. It was just what it was, and it wasn't something I ever rubbed in his face. But I could tell it bothered him since our teachers made it a point to note. I noticed it in the way he'd react when I won yet another writing competition, or when my work was chosen to be published in the school's literary magazine. His face always had a tight smile, his eyes just a little too intense. It wasn't long before I figured that Owen didn't just want to be good, he wanted to be the best, and for him, that meant outshining me. Yet, I did not have a problem with this. I, for one, believed that the world was big enough for two good people to shine, and if anything, the friendly competition brought out the desire to be better. There was no harm in it, and I could not think of a way things could go wrong quickly. But apparently, the more I succeeded, the more Owen seemed to resent me. It was as if every time I achieved something, it was a reminder to him that he was still in second place. That jealousy festered, driving him to do whatever it took to prove he was better than me. I was on a roll. Every competition, every project seemed to fall into place perfectly. My teachers were always telling me how much potential I had, and how they could see me doing great things in the world of literature. I had just won first place in the school's annual poetry contest, and my short story had been selected for a regional competition. It felt like everything I had been working toward was finally coming together. Of course, all this success didn't go unnoticed by my classmates, especially Owen. I could feel his eyes on me whenever I won another award or received praise from a teacher. At first, I thought maybe I was just imagining it. Then I started noticing little things like how Owen would avoid talking to me after I won something, or how his smile would never quite reach his eyes. There was just an unusual edge to him, but I tried not to think too much about it. As the deadline for the scholarship application approached, I threw myself into my work with everything I had. This scholarship was everything to me. It was my chance to study at one of the best universities in the country, one that my parents could never dream of affording, to finally make my dreams of becoming a writer a reality. I spent hours perfecting my submission, a short story that I was particularly proud of. It was one of those rare pieces that seemed to write itself, the kind of story that just felt right. But while I was focused on my work, Owen was focused on something else entirely. I didn't know it at the time, but Owen had been watching me closely, waiting for the right moment to strike. He knew I spent most of my time in the school library, where I worked on my scholarship submission. So, he started hanging around more often, pretending to be interested in the same books, and asking me casual questions about my progress. It was all part of his plan to gain my trust. One afternoon, when I had to step out for a meeting with the teacher, I made the mistake of leaving my laptop unattended in the library. I didn't think much of it. After all, it was the school library, and I trusted my classmates. But that's when Owen made his move. With no one around, he quickly accessed my laptop, opening the file that contained my scholarship entry. Owen's plan was simple but effective. He didn't change much, just enough to alter the tone and flow of the story. He replaced key phrases with awkward, clunky sentences, added unnecessary details that disrupted the pacing, and even swapped out a few more powerful words with weaker synonyms. By the time he was done, my story was a shadow of what it had been. It became a disjointed mess that no judge would take seriously. The worst part was that I had no idea what had happened. When I returned to the library, everything seemed normal. I sat back down and quickly glanced over my work to note that I had not exceeded the word count, and then I submitted the file immediately. A few days later, the results of the first round of the scholarship competition were posted. I was eager to see how my story had been received, but when I saw the feedback, my heart sank. The judges had torn my story apart, criticizing everything from the pacing to the language. They said it lacked coherence and emotional depth. These were things I prided myself on in my writing. I couldn't believe what I was reading. How could I have messed up so badly on something that I had worked so hard on? That's when I decided to go back and read through my submission again, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. As I went through the story, I started noticing strange changes, awkward phrases that I knew I hadn't written, sentences that seemed completely out of place. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just a bad day of writing. Something was seriously wrong. It didn't take long for me to piece things together. I remembered the time I had left my laptop unattended in the library, the way Owen had been acting lately, and how he seemed to always be around whenever I was working on my story. It was Owen. It had to be him. He was the only one with the vengeance of beating me that could decide to tamper with my work. And there was also the fact that he had been acting a bit strange, but I could not go around accusing people without having any evidence to back up my claims. This was the thought I had when I decided to check the last cloud save I made on the file. I was able to recover the additions I made before the day of the submission, and as I predicted, they were starkly different. I spent the next few days thinking about how I could turn the tables on him. I needed to expose Owen for what he'd done, and if I was going to clear my name and salvage my scholarship chances, I had to be smart about this. I started by going over everything I knew about Owen. I realized that if I could find a way to connect Owen to the sabotage, I could prove my innocence and expose him for the fraud he was. The first step in my plan was to gather as much evidence as I could. I started by going back to the library where it all happened. I spent hours retracing my steps, trying to remember exactly what had happened that day. I checked my library's computer logs and noticed that someone had accessed my file when I was away. The timestamp on the file's last modification matched the time I was meeting with my teacher. This was my first piece of evidence, but I needed more. Next, I reached out to a few classmates who had been in the library that day. I casually asked if they'd seen anyone around my laptop while I was gone. At first, no one seemed to remember anything unusual, but then one of them mentioned seeing Owen sitting near my spot. The timestamp of the changes made to the file and the time that some claimed Owen might have borrowed my spot for a bit clashed. I took screenshots of the edit history, making sure to document everything. But I needed something more concrete. Something that would tie all of this directly to Owen. I decided to set a trap. I started working on a news story, something I made sure to mention loudly around Owen, knowing it would pique his interest. Then, I deliberately left my laptop unattended again, this time with 3 of my closest friends watching the system, and just as I expected, he did the same thing again, only that this time, he was caught in the act. I presented all the evidence to the teachers in charge and they reasoned along with all I presented. Although I couldn't resubmit my original file to the competition since the time for submission had passed, and to open it again would simply be favoritism, the truth came out loud and clear. Owen was suspended and permanently disqualified from ever participating in any school competition again. And in that moment, I was satisfied with that. You know, sometimes just exposing the truth is the ultimate victory in a situation like this, because OP could have easily clapped back at this Owen guy and tampered with some of his work, but instead, he did some pretty boss-level detective work and basically baited him into doing the same thing again and exposing him. So congratulations, you win, and it doesn't sound like Owen's going to be pulling anything like this anytime soon. Our next story is... My dad thinks that I'm incompetent because I gave up on being a doctor. My dad is being petty. He decided to cut off my allowance and any access I have to his money because I dented his car, but to be honest, the real reason for this is because I decided to quit school after 3 years as a medical student. My parents own a private practice. It's always been their plan for me, 24-year-old male, and my sister to take over after they retire, and as a little child, I always thought I would make them proud by becoming a doctor. Most of my classmates were envious of the fact that I had doctors as parents. It was such a big deal to them that it prompted me to want to become one. Also, as a kid, I spent a lot of time at their hospital and didn't understand a lot at the time. All I saw were the nice staffs that gifted me with sweets and snacks whenever I was there, and being in my dad's office most of the times, using his stethoscope as a plaything and any other device I could lay my hands on. I had no idea what being a doctor was all about then, and who could blame me? I was just a child. I think the reality check started as soon as I graduated from high school. Before that, I stopped going to my parents' office when I was 12, and that was because of the traumatic experience I had having to watch my dad tear into the flesh of a person. He's a plastic surgeon, while my mom is a dermatologist. That was my first time being in an operating room with my dad. I was excited, at the same time nervous, to see my dad in action. As soon as he took the scalpel and tore into the patient's flesh, a wave of nausea hit me, and I had to hold it back because I didn't want to look like a joke. I couldn't hold it for long. I ended up leaving the room to throw up. I wasn't new to seeing people operate on a person. I see my dad watch videos of professional working, and I sometimes sit with him to watch, but in real life, it was so different from how I imagined it to be. My dad was disappointed in me. I could see it in his face as soon as he got out of the surgery. Later that night, he told me I would get used to it. I just needed time. I never went back to the hospital after this. I always had an excuse not to make it whenever I was asked to come in. I'm sure my dad knew I was lying, but I guess he was biding his time because as soon as I graduated, he and my mom insisted I worked at the hospital for a year. I knew there was no place for me to hide this time. No excuse to make or way to corner myself out of this, but I managed to bargain with them. The deal was to spend 3 days at the hospital while I spent the 2 working days left out of the week learning how to drive. I really tried my best to learn how to enjoy being a doctor, but I just didn't. The long surgical hours were exhausting. I was asked to start from the very bottom. I was given the task of entering the patient's name into the system accordingly for a month. There were slow days and some days were good. I managed to find a way to keep myself busy on the slow days. This was how I got familiar with the vast world of tech. There were lots of options and it was challenging, and I loved a good challenge. I decided to dig a little deeper by doing my research, and I found out I could take courses I was interested in. According to the plans made by my parents, I was to spend 6 months at my dad's practice, which was 2 floors away from my mom's, and the other half at my mom's place before going to a medical college. I couldn't decide which was worse between both, but the silver lining was I had 2 days of driving lessons, which I never applied for. I would leave home and find a spot at some random cafe to take an online course on. It was easy to fool my parents for a while. It worked for about a month before they found out there was no driving lessons. I got caught by my dad when he coincidentally came into the coffee shop I was, and I was so into what I was doing, I had no idea he was watching me the whole time. I must have spent close to 3 hours before I stood up to leave and saw my dad's furious gaze on me. I knew he wasn't going to go easy on me, and I was right. The little freedom I had was gone. I spent 4 excruciating months trying to pretend that I loved being in the OR, helping my dad with ideas on how to fix a broken nose or enlarge butts. Then I had to spend another 3 months with my mom. Hers was a little better. She rarely had patients, but when she did, they were mostly familiar faces, so she attended to them in private because most of her patients valued their privacy. Unlike my dad's place, where his patients, they were mostly under anesthesia. I think something about seeing me rebellious made my dad more triggered because he made sure I applied to 4 different colleges earlier than he initially intended, 2 of which were private institutions, hoping I would get picked to study medicine. He eventually got his wish. I was 3 months into working with my mom when I got an acceptance letter from one of the private institutions. I was shocked. I knew I was a smart kid, but I never thought my SATs were good enough to get me admitted as a medical student. To be honest, I wasn't planning on telling anyone. I was thinking of doing nothing and hoping the admission would pass, but I knew that was a crappy plan because my parents wouldn't give up. It would be exhausting days of reapplying to different colleges until I get picked to study what they want. At least I got a certain level of freedom from being in college. My dad and mom couldn't monitor all my moves. In the end, I told my parents about my acceptance letter and they were so happy for me. My dad took my sister, I, and my mom out to celebrate. I felt so confused and unfulfilled, but I kept telling myself it would get better as soon as I left home. I spent the rest of the 3 months planning towards college. My parents were already drilling me on what to expect as a medical student. I always wanted to tell them it was their dream, not mine, but I was too scared to retaliate. I got to college and got the freedom I desperately needed from my parents, but then the workload started kicking in. The first few months, I had time, enough time to retake some of the courses I was forced to quit at home, but then came the intense work hours and I knew I couldn't juggle 2 intense courses together. Our lecturer spent time advising us to think of what we truly wanted before starting out a journey that could determine the course of our lives. And I got to find out a lot more course mates of mine faced with the same things I faced at home. They had no choice but to study medicine because their parents were doctors. Everyone else kept saying the same thing, that our parents were just looking out for us and wanted what was best for their kids, and in some years' time, we would be thanking them for pushing us the way they did. While they weren't wrong, I was so sure of one thing, that I could never like being a doctor or working at a hospital, no matter how long it takes. I knew what I was into. It wasn't out of peer pressure or a phase. I loved everything about technology and its advancement, and the ability to create more and more mind-blowing AI was more interesting to me than holding a scalpel. My roommate was also a medical student who was a book-smart but socially awkward guy. He could tell I wasn't into the medicine. I would rather talk about the latest ongoing project I had going on a software programming course than talking about a recent course I found too hard to understand, but he was a cool guy who never pushed or tried to be condescending. He just believed it was best I did what I loved. I was failing miserably by the end of the second year. My grades had fallen, although it wasn't like I was doing so well in the first place. I had lost interest in all the courses we did. No matter how hard I tried to keep up, I couldn't. I went home for the holidays and tried to explain to my mom I wasn't doing so well, but to her it was a phase and I would eventually love it, especially when I see how diverse the medical world was and had a lot of options to choose from. I knew that was never going to happen, so by the beginning of my third year, I was getting advised to withdraw. I wasn't getting any better, nor was I showing signs of wanting to get better. I knew I couldn't deceive myself any longer, so I did what I had been too scared to do and withdraw out of my college. I knew what to expect at home, but I had wasted 3 years of my life trying to be what I wasn't, and my roommate could tell I was not passion-driven by my major. So my parents definitely knew I wasn't interested, but they didn't care. My dad especially. So why should I care about what he wants? It was my life, and it was time to start living it right. As soon as I got home and relayed the news to my parents, I could tell they both weren't thrilled as I expected. My mom wasn't as mad as I thought she would be. Maybe a part of her had been expecting this long-awaited day, but my dad didn't say a word. He just stood up and stormed out of the house without telling anyone where he was off to. He came back the next day, and since then, he'd been giving me the silent treatment. He doesn't talk to me, doesn't acknowledge my presence anymore. He doesn't even care about what I do with my time anymore. I guess that this is his way of saying I'm done with you. I recently decided to take the driving lessons for real this time. While I figure out what to do with my life, and the driving lessons had been going great, I decided to go for a test drive with my dad's other car, and everything was going great till I was about to park the car. I ended up causing a small dent on the car, which I was planning on fixing the next day, but my dad was one step ahead of me. He saw the dent and he was furious. It was the first time he talked to me in months. I told him I was going to have the car fixed the next day, but he wasn't having it. I knew it was more than the car. He was taking out months of anger on me. He yelled and screamed about how I was a disappointment to the family, and he was cutting off all the access I had to his money, or better still leave his home if I was going to waste my life. I understood where he was coming from, but I had no idea why he just couldn't give up on the idea that I was going to become a doctor. It could be my sister's dream to become one, but it wasn't mine. I took my bags and left home, and I've been squatting with a friend. I've been working at a laundry service for now while trying to reapply to study my dream course. My mom comes over to visit me, urging me to come back home, but I know better. It would not solve anything. Besides, it's high time I start thinking for myself. Ultimately, the best revenge would be proving to my dad his mindset is wrong, and I intend to do that by showing him I can become successful not just by being a doctor, but also in any field I put my mind to. So my advice before reading those last couple paragraphs were going to be to remove yourself from that situation. Don't put yourself in a situation where you are relying on someone who is just going to put that unrealistic pressure on you. It's your life, you do what you want. It sounds like your mom is kind of at least seeing the big picture, but dad just needs a break and you need a break from him. So yeah, cut it off, go do your own thing and prove that you can still be successful. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and comment below. And if you want to check out our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.